Good morning, Team Dominator. This is a live emergency update as Francine is nearing hurricane status, and we do have a slight shift off to the east of the National Hurricane Center track. That's what we're watching right now, but it definitely survived the dry air. It is nearing hurricane strength. We just have a hot tower right near the inner core. You can see a lot of banding as well happening here, and it is making a beeline now for the eastern edge of Vermilion Bay, so it has shifted just a little bit east. Thank you everybody for tuning in to this live weather report. I just did one and my mic died, so I did like a 20-minute live update on mute over at Bookface, but this one I got the mic fixed. And look at all that spiral banding coming in. It battled a little bit of dry air overnight, and that precluded Francine from reaching hurricane status overnight. It's a tropical storm, central pressure down to 988 millibars. So we are going to talk about the latest with this hurricane, and it's about a tropical storm right now, probably a hurricane already, folks, certainly. And I'm going to show you some of these high-resolution hurricane models to start off. And let me get my Epic pen dialed back in here. Once again, there is the H-Wharf model, folks. What is going on here? This is the 6C H-Wharf model, 967 millibar central pressure. Look at those tornadic supercells as well on the eastern edge of that circulation. Right in that outer band, that is going to be a tornado outbreak that is likely going to materialize. But despite that dry air, definitely is still ahead of schedule compared to the forecast models we were looking at yesterday. And remember that Francine wasn't forecast to really intensify until it got into that favorable ventilation zone just ahead of an upper level trough into the northwest of that anticyclone dominating the Gulf of Mexico. And that's going to be 24 hours leading up to landfall. So basically the next 24 hours, this thing is forecast to intensify, and this outer band is really going to get vigorous as that comes into southeastern Louisiana. These are going to be tornado producing supercells moving off to the northeast at like 40, 45, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, even faster than that. Wedge waterspouts are going to be making landfall, moving off to the northwest, capable of causing damage. That includes areas like New Orleans, Houma, Baton Rouge, Venice right on the tip, all the way up to southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, and eventually into Pensacola even. It looks like on Wednesday evening could have a pretty significant tornado threat with that feeder band just coming right in off the Gulf of Mexico. But look at this ripper making landfall. And it even, right at the last second, wraps that convection right along the southern edge, at least according to the H-Wharf model. That means that it can't be feeling that much southwesterly wind shear right at landfall, and that ventilation is just going to continue. But looking at all the hurricane models, a lot of them are starting to consolidate around this track over the eastern portion of Vermilion Bay up toward Morgan City. Could get that onshore flow as well. I think you're going to have some big problems out near Grand Isle down here too, with that feeder band coming onshore, squalls, big onshore flow, wedge waterspouts coming onshore as well down near Grand Isle, Port Fourchon, Golden Meadow, those areas. Also up toward New Orleans, of course. Covington, Slidell could get in on the tornado potential as well coming in. And it is moving a little bit faster too. So it looks like it could even make landfall as early as late morning toward midday tomorrow. So we got to get the lead out and head down there and definitely start chasing this thing. The H-Mon is probably the most aggressive still, 962 millibar central pressure at landfall, and also that position over the eastern edge of Vermilion Bay, and that would bring this very dangerous onshore flow all the way across southeastern Louisiana. And look at those supercells as well along the eastern edge. You got that feeder band that's going to be just pumping into southeastern Louisiana, causing all kinds of problems. That's going to be a tornado outbreak right there, folks. And that feeder band, I am sweating right now looking at some of these models. But this is a major tornado outbreak that's going to be happening here over southeastern Louisiana, and that includes the New Orleans area. So this is going to be during the day tomorrow. We're going to have to decide whether we chase the inner core of this powerful hurricane or the tornado threat or both Probably both. We'll probably end up in Morgan City, and then it'll start piping up and then work some of this tornado potential in these outer bands. We are going to be going live here on the Team Dominator network as well. 962 central pressure, and it is wrapping that convection all the way around. It feels a little bit of southwest and northeast oriented shear, but that ventilation just ahead of that trough is more than sufficient to maintain a vertically aligned hurricane, at least according to the hurricane models here. We'll look at some of the newer HAFSB model here. A little weaker, 977 millibars, so and it is right over the heart of Vermilion Bay. We were going to try to ride it out in a stilt home there in Cypremort Point, but it looks now like with this little eastward shift that you might have some more offshore flow there. You're still going to get big surge though in Vermilion Bay just because of the low pressure. You get a little bubble on the ocean in the center of these hurricanes. That accounts for like 25 to a third of the storm surge. So with this bubble of low pressure coming right into the heart of Vermilion Bay, that's going to lead to major water rise, 5 to 10 foot storm surge along Vermilion Bay and also further east as well over southeastern Louisiana. And you have a lot of these supercells that are going to be coming ashore right there with tornado potential. The high resolution models do an incredible job at showing those supercell storms in the outer bands. And the HRRR model definitely shows the environmental conditions getting favorable for that tornado threat. This thing could even come all the way up near the Memphis area as a tropical low, bringing with it that tornado potential as well. So looking at some of the latest hurricane model tracks, let me bring this a little bit off to the west. It does look like they are shifting just a little bit eastward toward the eastern edge of Vermilion Bay. These are the 12Z models. At least we don't have any of those members that are heading over to the Houston area or southwest of Louisiana anymore. They definitely feel that northeastward turn as that trough begins to eject. And the ventilation happens when you get more northerly winds ahead of the trough, and then you get that high pressure down in the Gulf of Mexico that bends these winds a little bit more westerly, and that creates this pocket of ventilation just the last 24 hours leading up to landfall when it could really start to ramp up Francine on approach to the southeastern coastline of Louisiana. And I want to show you something else here too. The intensity forecasts have come down just a little bit overnight. The trend is your friend when you're looking at those. But then I look over at the global models and notice how many of these members on the eastern edge of the forecast envelope, those are stronger. You've got some darker oranges there, some darker reds that are happening. And that means that a stronger storm that's ahead of schedule seems to be taking the eastern edge of this forecast model envelope, at least according to the GFS ensemble. Slightly weaker storms a little bit further west here up into south central Louisiana. But it looks like you have much stronger tropical cyclones along the eastern edge of that forecast envelope, which means that I think that I agree with the eastward shift toward the eastern edge of Vermilion Bay, but that's not a good thing for southeastern Louisiana because that's going to bring the dirty side of that storm system right over southeastern Louisiana. I want to look a little bit more in depth at the tornado threat too, so we're going to pop on over to the HRRR model here, and this is your 0 to 1 kilometer energy helicity index. This shows you where your surface-based instability co-locates with that stronger low-level wind shear. And notice how Wednesday afternoon, right during landfall and a little bit prior to landfall, it actually ramps up right over southeastern Louisiana. That includes the New Orleans area from Venice up toward New Orleans. Very favorable environment there over southeastern Louisiana for tornadoes. And that favorable environment is going to lift onshore up here across the central Gulf Coast, including southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, Florida Panhandle, Pensacola, Mobile, Gulfport could be included in there. And that has this north front right quadrant of the tropical cyclone lifts up into that zone. And anytime you get a tropical cyclone that's already interacting with an upper level trough, it creates very favorable conditions for tornadoes. And we can look at some of our forecast photographs here. Let me make sure that that's even on the screen. It is. And here it is. This is a major hook-shaped photograph. Captain Hook up there. A lot of easterlies in the lowest 2 kilometers in that front right quadrant of the tropical cyclone. Your surface wind southeasterly. That's at about 25 to 30 knots. The wind just above the ground goes to southeast as well. A little bit more southerly, accelerates up to like 70 knots. That creates like 40 to 50 knots of bulk shear in your 0 to 1 kilometer layer. A due southerly mover at about 45 to 50 miles an hour would definitely squeeze out a lot of storm relative inflow, a lot of storm relative shear. And basically you rotate that photograph 180 degrees and it looks like a Dixie Alley photograph. So that's why these tropical cyclones are so prolific at producing tornadoes. And you also can see the trough interaction here in the middle and upper troposphere with those southwesterly winds of 40 to 50 knots. You can see that up here in the photograph Those stronger southwest, mid, and upper tropospheric winds help to improve, help to bend that storm motion more to a due southerly direction, and that leads to even more storm relative inflow there, storm relative wind shear in your hodograph. So anytime you get a tropical cyclone that gets picked up by an upper level trough like this, and you get those upper level winds that are out in this quadrant of the hodograph plotting unit, that means that you're going to get a lot of tornadoes. And I think that this is going to be a prolific tornado producer. Major hodograph right there. That's going to squeeze out a lot of wind shear. Likely a tornado outbreak from southeastern Louisiana and across southern Mississippi and southern Alabama. Look at that low level wind shear, southeasterly to a southerly low level jet. And then you go over to these southwesterly winds aloft as they're starting to interact with the trough. Not a lot of dry air entrainment. That's coming in from the backside of this tropical cyclone by this time, but after the tropical cyclone makes landfall and then that dry air comes around the backside, that could lead to a little bit of destabilization in at least that east central and southeastern quadrant of the tropical cyclone. And we'll go forward with time on our HRRR model. We're looking at the tornado environment with time. Look at this. By Wednesday evening, it begins to stretch up toward Mobile, Gulfport, Biloxi, up toward Pensacola as well. Landfalling waterspouts expected within these bands. Strong wind shear. Supercells moving on shore south to northwest at about 50 miles an hour. Landfalling wedge waterspouts expected. And that's going to be Wednesday evening as that tornado potential begins to really ramp up, especially for the Pensacola area. Look at that, folks, near Mobile, Pensacola, 10 p.m. to midnight. You're going to have a little wedge of instability coming right up into that central Gulf Coast region, and I expect major tornado outbreak. At first, Wednesday, late morning, morning time through the afternoon, southeastern Louisiana, including New Orleans, and then eventually stretching up coastal Mississippi, Alabama, Florida Panhandle. Looks to get into to the action. So hit that notification button. We are going to be going live, Team Dominator, and you know what happens when we go live. We go crazy out there. We cover immersive coverage. We'll be probably nipple deep in some of the flooding. Look at the 500 millibar vort. So this thing basically merges with the upper level trough after it makes landfall, and that stretches the strong southwest winds of 50 to 60 knots just downstream of that. And I'm seeing a major tornado outbreak, central Gulf Coast region. Watch out, folks. This is going to be a big ripper. Look at that, 850, well, basically a big 850 low, but a lot of times the tornadoes like to really maximize right near this wind shift. You can see that wind shift happening right there, basically almost an effective warm front, and right around that zone, that's where the tornadoes like to really maximize. They move in due north from the instability and then hit that wind shift, and then they start to go berserk with these tropical cyclones. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen with this, with Hurricane Francine as it comes in. Looking at the latest official cone, 988 millibar central pressure, maximum sustained winds at 65 miles an hour, a slightly eastward shift track over the eastern edge of Vermilion Bay happening there. And you also have your tropical storm warnings being extended east all the way to the Alabama border, almost to Mobile, and even some tropical storm watches in Mobile because of that eastward shift. So watch out. Some of that in the central Gulf Coast, coastal Mississippi through Alabama could have some issues as well. So the National Hurricane Center has decreased the forecast a little bit, but I think it's going to come right back up to 100 miles an hour. And look at these hot towers here wrapping right up into the inner core of this compact storm. You can see that the dry air is clearly not impacting this thing nearly as much. And maybe this little predecessor system right here will help moisten up the environment a little bit. But last night it was pulling in a little bit of dry air off of Mexico, and that was preventing it from becoming a hurricane last night. But it's still south of the Brownsville latitude, so still a long way to go for this tropical cyclone as it heads off to the northeast. But I'm going to have to hit the road here pretty soon. I'm on shaky ground with some of the rental car companies here, but I'm going to take good care of this rental car, of course. And yeah, my mic was not able to rock and roll on this one, so that's probably why it's held down a little bit. So if you guys can dominate that like button, I'd really appreciate it. And we are going to be heading down to intercept this hurricane. I agree, it's definitely going to be a Cat 2. I wouldn't even be surprised if it is a Cat 3 up there. So thanks everybody for tuning into this weather report. Never stop chasing.